Do you think your life is tough? Try being a queen in the Middle Ages, roughly between the 5th and 15th centuries. Forget TikTok and Netflix. These women had an entirely different set of rules, expectations, and pressures. Some were so extreme, you might just do a double take. Get ready to discover the astonishing reality of what it meant to wear the crown, because these 15 rules will absolutely blow your mind. Number 1. Her sole purpose was to secure the dynasty with an heir. This was perhaps the single most overwhelming, all-consuming, and utterly defining rule in a medieval queen's life. From the moment she became a queen, her primary, often her only job, was to produce an heir, preferably a male one. Her very existence, her political standing, her personal security, and the future of an entire kingdom rested on her fertility. This was not a side task. It was the main event, a biological imperative that overshadowed all other duties. If she failed in this monumental task, her position became precarious, her influence waned, and she faced the very real threat of repudiation, a polite term for being sent away, often to a convent or even executed to make way for a queen who could deliver the desired result. The royal bedchamber was not a private haven for intimacy, but a site of intense public scrutiny, at least indirectly. Courtiers, physicians, and even the common people whispered and watched for any sign of pregnancy. Queen's monthly cycle was a topic of hushed conversation among her ladies-in-waiting, and any delay brought a collective holding of breath across the court. Queen Isabella of Castile, for instance, bore many children, and her continued fertility solidified her power and the stability of her kingdom. But for others, like Queen Eleanor of Aquitaine, who initially only had daughters with King Louis VII of France, the failure to produce a male heir became a significant factor in the dissolution of their marriage. She eventually found success with her second husband, King Henry II of England, providing him with a long line of sons. The entire court machinery was geared towards ensuring a successful pregnancy and birth. Physicians were constantly consulted, remedies were tried, and prayers were offered. Superstition mingled with rudimentary medical knowledge. Queen might be advised to eat certain foods, avoid others, or even engage in specific rituals believed to enhance fertility. The stress associated with this relentless expectation was immense. Imagine living your entire adult life with the knowledge that your fundamental worth, your very right to exist in your elevated position, depended entirely on your reproductive capacity. It was a pressure cooker environment where a misstep, a miscarriage, or the birth of yet another daughter could spell disaster for your future. The birth of a male heir was met with widespread jubilation, marked by feasts, public celebrations, and the ringing of church bells throughout the kingdom. It was a moment of profound relief for the queen, signaling her success and securing her place. Conversely, a string of daughters, or the absence of any children at all, led to growing anxiety, not just for the queen, but for the entire kingdom. The lack of a male heir meant a potential succession crisis, civil war, or the end of a dynasty. This immense burden of dynastic continuity rested squarely on the queen's shoulders, a weight that few modern individuals could ever truly comprehend. The fate of nations literally hinged on her womb, making it the most politically charged organ in the realm. Historians frequently point to the struggles of Queen Anne of Cleves, whose marriage to Henry VIII of England was annulled primarily due to the lack of a successful pregnancy, highlighting how central this role was to a queen's very survival in her position. Her failure to conceive meant her swift removal, a stark reminder of the unforgiving nature of this fundamental rule. Number 2. Her marriage was a political contract, not a romance. Forget the fairy tales of love at first sight and passionate unions. For a medieval queen, marriage was a meticulously crafted political contract, a strategic alliance designed to consolidate power, expand territories, and secure peace. Love, if it ever blossomed, was a fortunate byproduct, never the primary objective. From a very young age, often in early childhood, a queen's future was mapped out on the chessboard of European diplomacy. Her hand in marriage was a valuable commodity traded among kingdoms like a strategic piece. In a complex game, negotiations could drag on for years, involving detailed discussions about dowries, territorial concessions, and future alliances. These were not personal choices, they were dynastic necessities. A young princess might be betrothed to a foreign prince she had never met, whose language she did not speak, and whose culture was entirely alien to her. Her feelings were irrelevant, her duty was paramount. Eleanor of Castile, for example, was married to Edward I of England at a very young age, as part of a treaty to settle long-standing territorial disputes between England and Spain. Her journey to England was a formidable undertaking, a physical and emotional transplantation to a new land and a new life entirely dictated by the demands of her father's kingdom and her future husband's. Her initial impressions of her new husband in court would have been entirely overshadowed by the weight of her responsibilities. The marriage ceremony itself was a grand public spectacle, often attended by dignitaries from across Europe, designed to solidify the new alliance in the eyes of the world. It was a political statement, not a celebration of personal affection. The bedding ceremony, a ritualized presentation of the newlyweds to witnesses, underscored the public nature of the union and the expectation of immediate consummation for the purpose of procreation. There was no privacy, only duty. The entire arrangement was about creating a bridge between two ruling houses, linking their fortunes, their armies, and their resources. The success of the marriage was measured not by the happiness of the couple, but by its political utility. Did it prevent war? Did it secure a crucial trade route? Did it produce the necessary heirs? If a marriage failed to deliver on these political promises, it could be dissolved often on flimsy pretexts, to clear the way for a more advantageous match. King Henry VIII's notorious series of marriages perfectly illustrates this rule. His pursuit of a male heir and his desire for politically beneficial alliances led him to discard wives who no longer served his strategic objectives. Catherine of Aragon, his first wife, was set aside after decades of marriage because she could not provide him with a living male heir, and England needed a stable succession. Her personal devotion and long service counted for little against the cold calculus of dynastic politics. The emotional toll on these women was immense. They were forced to leave their families, their homelands, and their familiar surroundings to step into a world where they were essentially a foreign asset. They had to quickly adapt to new customs, new languages, and a new court filled with strangers, many of whom might view them with suspicion or resentment. Their personal identity was subsumed by their political role. For queens like Philippa of Hainault, who married Edward III of England, adapting to a new culture and forging a strong bond with her husband and subjects was crucial for her survival and influence. Her success was an exception, often built on her strength of character and her ability to navigate complex political landscapes with grace and intelligence, rather than any inherent romantic attachment. The enduring image of a medieval queen is not one of romantic love, but of stoic duty, a living embodiment of a political treaty, forever bound by the needs of her kingdom. Number 3, she was bound by strict sumptuary laws. While modern celebrities might have stylists and endless fashion choices, a medieval queen's wardrobe was far from a personal expression. Instead, it was meticulously dictated by a complex system of sumptuary laws. These laws weren't about fashion trends. They were about social order, economic control, and the clear visual delineation of status. Every stitch, every color, every fabric, and every piece of jewelry a queen wore was a carefully calculated statement, not by her, but by the crown and the prevailing societal norms. Her clothing was a public declaration of her rank, her husband's wealth, and the kingdom's prestige. Deviation from these rules was not just a fashion faux pas. It was a challenge to the established social hierarchy. Sumptuary laws varied from kingdom to kingdom and over time, but their underlying purpose remained consistent: to prevent people from dressing above their station. For a queen, this meant she was obligated to wear the most lavish, expensive, and opulent materials available, precisely because she was at the very apex of society. Her gowns would be crafted from silks imported from distant lands, velvets dyed with rare and costly pigments like Tyrian purple or cochineal red, and brocades woven with threads of real gold and silver. Her furs would be exotic and precious, ermine being a particular favorite symbolizing purity and royalty. Imagine being told exactly what you must wear down to the type of embroidery and the number of pearls on your circlet. It was less about personal taste and more about performing a role. Queen Margaret of Denmark, for example, was known for her austere but undeniably regal attire, which was meticulously planned to convey power and legitimacy. Even her simplicity was a statement within the sumptuary framework. The extravagance of a queen's attire was directly linked to the perceived strength and wealth of her husband's kingdom. If the kingdom was flourishing, her robes would reflect that prosperity, shimmering with jewels and heavy with expensive embroidery. If times were lean, her attire might be slightly less extravagant, but still unmistakably royal, always adhering to the unspoken rule that a queen must always look the part. Her jewelry was equally regulated. Crowns, circlets, necklaces, and rings were not merely decorative. They often incorporated specific gemstones and designs that conveyed symbolic meaning or were part of the royal regalia passed down through generations. These were not accessories she could pick and choose on a whim. Each piece was a part of her public persona, an emblem of her authority and the continuity of the dynasty. Queen's attire was also designed to withstand the rigors of court life, public appearances, and sometimes even travel. It was heavy, restrictive, and often uncomfortable, a physical manifestation of the burdens of her office. The layers of undergarments, stiff bodices, and voluminous skirts were all part of this elaborate costume, ensuring she moved with a regal slowness and conveyed an aura of untouchable majesty. The sumptuary laws extended beyond just material and ornamentation. Certain colors were often restricted to royalty or the highest nobility, such as deep blues, purples, and rich reds derived from incredibly expensive dyes. The very silhouette of her gowns, the length of her train, the height of her headdress, all these elements were carefully prescribed. Queen was a living, breathing advertisement for her kingdom's status and wealth, a walking billboard of power and prestige. Her daily dressing was a ritualistic transformation into this public symbol, a process that left little room for individual preference or personal comfort. Historians note that sumptuary laws often served as a subtle form of social control, reminding everyone of their place in the rigid hierarchy with the queen's elaborate wardrobe. At the very pinnacle of this visual display. Number 4. She had to endure public childbirth. This rule is perhaps one of the most astonishing and invasive. For a medieval queen, the birth of an heir was not a private, intimate family affair. It was a highly publicized, heavily scrutinized, and often ritualized public spectacle. From the moment the queen went into labor, her chamber would be filled with witnesses. These were not just her closest female attendants, but often powerful nobles, church dignitaries, and even members of the king's council. The purpose of this audience was unequivocal: to ensure the legitimacy of the newborn heir. There could be no question of substitution, no whispers of a changeling, no doubt about the child's royal lineage. Every part of the process, from the first contractions to the final delivery, was observed and attested to. Imagine the immense pressure. While in the throes of labor, enduring excruciating pain with limited medical intervention, a queen was simultaneously on public display. Her cries, her struggles, her moments of weakness were all witnessed by a room full of powerful onlookers. It was a bizarre blend of extreme vulnerability and ultimate public performance. The queen was expected to maintain a degree of composure, even in such trying circumstances, demonstrating her fortitude and dedication to her royal duty. Chroniclers often recorded the events of royal births with a level of detail that highlights their public importance, noting who was present in the moment the child was first presented to the world. Queen Eleanor of Aquitaine, despite her formidable power and influence, would have undergone this experience with each of her many births. Each time a room full of people would have witnessed her at her most exposed all to ensure the legitimacy of her children. This ritual was considered absolutely essential for dynastic security. In an era where communication was slow and rumor rampant, visual proof was paramount. If a child's parentage was ever questioned, it could lead to devastating civil wars and succession crises. This public display was the medieval equivalent of modern DNA testing a way to authenticate the royal bloodline. The childbirth chamber, usually the most grand and comfortable room in the castle, would be transformed into a highly choreographed stage. Curtains might be drawn for some semblance of privacy, but the witnesses remained. Midwives, physicians, and experienced noblewomen would assist, but their actions were also observed. The moment the child is born, it would be presented to the assembled witnesses, often with specific phrases or rituals affirming its royal status and gender. If it was a male heir, the cheers and celebrations would erupt almost immediately. If it was a daughter, the reaction might be more subdued. Though still acknowledging the successful birth of a royal child, this public scrutiny extended even to the immediate aftermath of birth, including the presentation of the infant to the king and other high-ranking officials. It was a continuous performance of legitimacy. For a queen, this meant sacrificing any shred of personal dignity or privacy during one of life's most intense and vulnerable experiences. It was a stark reminder that her body, her fertility, and even her pain were ultimately not her own, but rather instruments of the state serving the relentless demands of dynastic continuity. Chronicles of King Edward III's reign, for instance, mention the numerous witnesses present at the birth of his children, including the Prince of Wales, Edward the Black Prince, underscoring the solemnity and public nature of these critical events. Number 5. Her education was highly specialized and sometimes secret. While many medieval women, particularly those of lower social standing, received little to no formal education, a queen's schooling was rigorous, extensive, and highly specialized. However, it was not the broad liberal arts education one might associate with modern royalty. Instead, it was meticulously tailored to her future role as a consort, a regent, and a dynastic anchor. The curriculum focused on skills essential for navigating the complex world of royal courts and international diplomacy. This included subjects that might seem surprising, some of which were even considered secret knowledge. First and foremost, a queen was expected to be fluent in multiple languages. Latin was crucial, as it was the language of the church scholarship and much international communication. French was often the lingua franca of courts across Europe, especially after the Norman conquest of England. If she was destined to marry a foreign prince, she would be expected to learn the language of his kingdom with remarkable speed. Queen Isabella of France, who married Edward II of England, would have arrived speaking French and had to quickly adapt to English court customs and communication, though French remained prominent in the English court at the time. This linguistic prowess was vital for diplomacy, for conversing with foreign dignitaries, and for fostering understanding between her birth family and her adopted kingdom. Beyond languages, a queen's education encompassed a deep understanding of court etiquette, heraldry, and genealogical history. She needed to know the intricate family trees of European nobility, understanding who was related to whom, what alliances existed, and what potential rivalries lay beneath the surface. This knowledge was critical for arranging future marriages for her own children, for navigating political factions within her husband's court, and for asserting her family's claims. It was essentially a crash course in political science and strategic social maneuvering, a complex web of relationships and power dynamics. The secret aspect of her education often involved practical skills related to healing and medicine. While male physicians existed, queens were frequently expected to have a working knowledge of herbal remedies, basic first aid, and even midwifery. This was not just for her personal use, but for the welfare of her household and, crucially, for her own health and the health of her children. In an era with high infant mortality and frequent epidemics, a queen with some medical knowledge could be invaluable. She might oversee the royal apothecaries, cultivate medicinal gardens, and even administer remedies to her children or her ladies. This practical medical knowledge was often passed down through generations of aristocratic women, a kind of internal, unspoken science within the court. Furthermore, a queen was trained in the arts of household management on an incredibly grand scale. She would learn how to manage vast estates, oversee hundreds of servants, control complex budgets, and organize grand feasts and ceremonies. This was not a hobby. It was a fundamental administrative responsibility. Her ability to run an efficient and well-ordered household reflected directly on the king's competence and the kingdom's prosperity. Queen Eleanor of Provence, wife of King Henry III of England, was renowned for her administrative capabilities and her deep involvement in managing her dower lands, ensuring her financial independence, and contributing to the royal coffers. Her specialized education equipped her to handle these intricate duties. Finally, her religious education was paramount. She was expected to be a pious example, understand theological doctrines, and support the church. She might even be literate enough to read religious texts and sponsor the creation of illuminated manuscripts. This deep religious grounding provided moral guidance and served as a crucial part of her public image. In essence, a queen's education was a demanding and highly practical curriculum, designed not for personal enlightenment, but to forge a supremely capable and strategically astute partner for the king, capable of upholding the immense weight of the crown. It was an education for power, influence, and survival in a world of high stakes. Number 6. She was a walking, talking symbol of power. Every aspect of a medieval queen's existence was a performance, a constant projection of power, legitimacy, and stability. She was not merely a person. She was a living, breathing emblem of the crown, an extension of her husband's authority, and a representation of the entire kingdom. This meant her every movement, her every word, and her very presence was imbued with symbolic meaning. Public image was meticulously crafted and fiercely protected because any perceived weakness or impropriety on her part could reflect negatively on the king and the realm itself. She literally embodied the strength and prestige of the monarchy. Her ceremonial duties were extensive and vitally important. A queen presided over court, received ambassadors, participated in religious processions, and attended countless feasts and tournaments. At each event, she was expected to project an aura of regal authority, grace, and unwavering composure. Her posture, her gestures, even the expression on her face were carefully managed to convey the appropriate message of power and dignity. When she processed through the streets, people would kneel, not just out of respect for her as an individual, but out of reverence for the crown she represented. She was the tangible manifestation of royal authority. Queen's regalia played a critical role in this symbolism. Her crown, her scepter, and her rich robes were not mere adornments. They were artifacts steeped in centuries of tradition, embodying the continuity of the dynasty and the divine right to rule. When she wore them, she literally became a conduit for that historical power. Her presence at coronations, royal marriages, and funerals underscored the legitimacy of these events and the enduring strength of the monarchy. Queen Matilda of England, wife of William the Conqueror, for instance, played a pivotal role in establishing the Norman dynasty in England, not just through her children, but through her consistent public display as a powerful and legitimate consort. She was a constant reminder of the strength of the new regime. Furthermore, her role as a symbol extended to her physical appearance and her personal conduct. She was expected to be impeccably moral, devoutly religious, and undeniably virtuous. Any scandal or hint of impropriety could undermine the entire royal house. Her chastity was paramount, not just for personal honor, but to ensure the undisputed legitimacy of her heirs. She was under constant surveillance with her ladies-in-waiting and other courtiers observing her every move. This intense scrutiny ensured that her public persona remained unblemished, serving as a powerful moral compass for the court and the kingdom. When the king was absent, perhaps on campaign or pilgrimage, the queen often acted as regent, wielding considerable power in his name. During these periods, her symbolic role became even more pronounced. She had to project the full authority of the monarch, making decisions, issuing decrees, and leading the kingdom. Her presence provided stability and continuity, a physical manifestation of the king's enduring rule. Philippa of Hainaut, for example, successfully governed England, while her husband Edward III was campaigning in France, even raising an army and defeating a Scottish invasion. Her ability to project royal power and command loyalty was crucial. Even in her private chambers, the queen was never truly off duty. Her household staff, her ladies, and her retainers all served to maintain the illusion of seamless royal power. Her meals, her daily routines, her moments of leisure, all were conducted with a degree of formality that reinforced her symbolic status. She was a constant, visible reminder that the monarchy was strong, stable, and divinely ordained. This relentless performance of power was a fundamental aspect of her existence, a duty that consumed her life from morning to night. Number 7. Her body was not your own. You won't believe this one for a medieval queen? Her own body was not truly her private domain. It was, in essence, a public commodity, a vessel for dynastic continuity and a tool for statecraft. Every aspect of her physical existence, from her reproductive capacity to her personal hygiene, and even her general health, was subject to intense scrutiny and control by the crown, her husband, and the court. Her body was a precious resource, vital for the survival and prosperity of the kingdom, and it was treated as such, with a relentless focus on its utility rather than its personal ownership. The most obvious and demanding aspect of this rule centered on her reproductive organs. Her primary duty was to produce heirs, specifically male heirs. This meant her body was constantly under observation for signs of pregnancy. Physicians and midwives regularly assessed her health, often with invasive examinations, to ensure she was in prime condition for conception and childbirth. Her diet, her activities, and even her emotional state could be monitored and dictated by those around her, all in the service of ensuring a healthy pregnancy. Queen Eleanor of Castile, as noted earlier, bore many children, and her pregnancies were moments of great public anticipation and scrutiny. Each miscarriage or difficult birth was a matter of public concern and a potential crisis for the dynasty. Beyond reproduction, a queen's body was also a public spectacle. As explored in the rule about sumptuary laws, her appearance was meticulously controlled, but this control extended beyond clothing. Her physical bearing, her movements, her posture, all were trained to project regal dignity. Even her physical ailments were matters of public interest. If she fell ill, it could cause widespread alarm, not just for her personal well-being, but for the stability she represented. Her recovery would be a cause for public celebration, a testament to her fortitude and, by extension, the kingdom's resilience. Court physicians were not just treating a patient. They were safeguarding a national asset. Personal hygiene, while not as openly discussed, was also subject to certain expectations. While not as rigidly regulated as appearance, a queen was expected to maintain a certain level of cleanliness and presentation, often with the assistance of numerous attendants. Baths, perfumes, and careful grooming were not personal indulgences, but part of maintaining the image of a polished, healthy, and prestigious ruler. Her hair, her skin, even her teeth, were all part of the overall presentation of royalty. Her attendants would likely oversee these rituals, leaving little room for personal discretion. Furthermore, a queen's body was subject to the rigors of travel, public ceremonies, and the general demands of court life. Long, arduous journeys across difficult terrain were common for royal women, whether moving to a new court after marriage, accompanying the king on progress, or visiting various royal estates. These journeys, often on horseback or in uncomfortable carriages, would have been physically demanding, testing her endurance. She would have to endure these hardships while maintaining her regal composure, regardless of fatigue or discomfort. Her body had to perform its duties even when physically strained. Perhaps one of the most stark examples of this lack of personal ownership over one's body was the custom of public childbirth, as discussed previously. The birthing chamber, filled with witnesses, turned the most intimate and vulnerable physical act into a public performance. Every groan, every push, every drop of blood was potentially seen by powerful figures, all to ensure the legitimacy of the heir. This ritual made it abundantly clear that a queen's body, particularly her reproductive capacity, belonged not to herself, but to the state and the dynasty. Her pain, her privacy, her physical autonomy, all were sacrificed for the greater good of the kingdom. It was a constant reminder that her personal desires were always secondary to the unyielding demands of her royal station. Number 8. Her voice was seldom her own. For a medieval queen, true personal expression, particularly in public forums, was a luxury rarely afforded. Her voice, both literally and figuratively, was seldom her own. Instead, it was carefully modulated, controlled, and often spoken through intermediaries or dictated by the demands of her role. When she did speak, her words carried immense weight and were meticulously chosen, serving the interests of the crown, her husband, or her dynasty, rather than expressing her personal opinions or desires. This constant filtering meant that the queen's true thoughts and feelings were often hidden behind a veil of courtly decorum and political necessity. In court, a queen was expected to be a gracious hostess, a silent observer in many political discussions, and a diplomatic presence. While she might occasionally offer advice to her husband in private, or even exert significant influence behind the scenes, her public utterances were usually carefully scripted or limited to ceremonial pleasantries. She was to appear agreeable, supportive, and in perfect alignment with the king's will. To openly contradict her husband or express strong dissenting opinions in public would be seen as a challenge to his authority, a sign of disunity within the royal couple, and a potential source of instability for the kingdom. Queen Catherine of Aragon, for example, maintained a public image of unwavering loyalty and piety even as her marriage to Henry VIII faced increasing challenges, speaking only in carefully measured terms that reflected her determined adherence to her position and her faith. Furthermore, a queen often communicated through her ladies-in-waiting, her chaplains, or her secretaries. These trusted individuals acted as her mouthpieces, conveying messages, issuing instructions, or engaging in negotiations on her behalf. This indirect communication provided a layer of protection, allowing her to express sensitive information or negotiate delicate matters without directly implicating herself. It was a common tactic in courtly intrigue, a way to exert influence without openly confronting rivals or challenging established power structures. This was also true for her written communications. While some queens were literate and penned their own letters, many official pronouncements and diplomatic correspondence would have been drafted by scribes, reflecting the official stance, rather than her unique voice. Even when advocating for causes she deeply believed in, such as charitable endeavors or religious foundations, a queen's public voice was often framed in terms of piety and duty rather than personal passion. She was expected to embody virtue and grace, and her actions were presented as extensions of her royal role. Queen Margaret of Scotland, known for her deep piety and charitable works, expressed her influence through establishing hospices and reforming the church, all while acting within the accepted boundaries of royal patronage and religious devotion. Her voice in these matters was one of benevolent authority, aligned with Christian principles and royal responsibilities. In situations of regency, when the king was absent or too young to rule, the queen's voice gained significant official authority. However, even then, her pronouncements were often made in the king's name, or on behalf of the crown. While she made crucial decisions, her public persona remained one of stewardship, maintaining the existing order until the rightful male ruler could assume his place. She was a temporary custodian of the royal voice, not its permanent embodiment. Her authority was derived, not innate. The true thoughts, frustrations, joys, and personal opinions of a medieval queen are often lost to history, buried beneath layers of protocol and political necessity. We glimpse them through her private letters, if any survived, or through the interpretations of contemporary chroniclers, who themselves might have been biased. Her public face, her public pronouncements, and her public actions were all carefully cardioed performances, ensuring that her voice always served the interests of the kingdom and the dynasty, even at the cost of her own authentic expression. She was a magnificent echo chamber for royal authority, rather than a distinct individual voice. Number 9. She had to master the art of courtly intrigue. Behind the glittering facade of medieval courts lay a viper's nest of ambition, jealousy, and treacherous plotting. For a queen, mastering the art of courtly intrigue was not merely a desirable skill. It was a matter of survival. She was constantly surrounded by rivals, ambitious nobles, and manipulative factions, all vying for power, influence, and royal favor. Navigating this treacherous landscape required a keen intellect, strategic thinking, an ability to read people, and a profound understanding of who to trust and who to fear. A queen who failed to grasp the nuances of courtly politics could quickly find herself isolated, powerless, or even dead. Her first task was to identify her allies and her enemies. Upon arrival at a new court, a young queen might be met with suspicion from the king's family, particularly his mother or his sisters, who might resent her presence or fear the erosion of their own influence. She would also have to contend with powerful, noble families who saw her as an outsider, or who sought to manipulate her for their own gain. Queen Anne Boleyn's tumultuous time as queen to Henry VIII is a stark example of a woman caught in the brutal currents of courtly intrigue. Despite her intelligence and charm, she faced fierce opposition from factions loyal to the discarded Catherine of Aragon, as well as powerful figures like Thomas Cromwell, who eventually orchestrated her downfall. Her failure to secure her position against these forces ultimately cost her life. To counter these threats, a queen needed to build her own network of loyal supporters. This involved cultivating relationships with her ladies-in-waiting, appointing trusted individuals to key positions within her household, and dispensing patronage wisely. She might gather information through her servants, listening to whispers and rumors, piecing together the true intentions behind seemingly innocent conversations. She needed to know who was feuding with whom, who was gaining favor, and who was falling out of grace. This constant vigilance was exhausting but essential. The art of intrigue also involved subtle manipulation and strategic silence. A queen might use her influence to promote certain individuals, subtly undermining rivals, or to spread carefully crafted rumors to achieve her objective. Sometimes the most powerful move was to say nothing at all, allowing others to expose themselves or to misinterpret her intentions. She might feign ignorance or weakness to lull opponents into a false sense of security. Queen Isabella of France, often called the she-wolf of France, proved herself a master of political maneuvering. When her husband Edward II alienated his nobles and failed to rule effectively, Isabella formed an alliance with Roger Mortimer, raising an army and ultimately deposing her husband to install her young son, Edward III, on the throne. Her actions, while extreme, demonstrated an unparalleled ability to navigate and exploit the brutal realities of court politics. Patronage was another critical tool. By granting favors, lands, or positions to her supporters, a queen could solidify her power base and ensure their loyalty. Conversely, she needed to be adept at identifying and neutralizing threats. Without making open enemies, this might involve subtly ostracizing individuals, denying them access to the king, or subtly spreading discrediting information. The stakes were incredibly high. A misstep could lead to loss of influence, loss of status, imprisonment, or even execution. The constant pressure to be aware of plots to anticipate betrayals and to defend her own position made court life a relentless battle of wits. Queen, though ostensibly powerful, was often as much a player as a prize in this deadly game of chess. Number 10. Her diet was dictated by protocol and health. A medieval queen's diet was far from a matter of personal preference or cravings. Instead, it was meticulously dictated by a complex interplay of royal protocol, perceived health benefits, religious observances, and the symbolic importance of her meals. Every dish served to her, every drink she consumed, was part of a grand performance, reflecting her status, the kingdom's wealth, and the rigorous structure of court life. It was a diet designed not just for sustenance, but for demonstration. Firstly, the queen's meals were abundant and lavish, serving as a powerful display of royal prosperity and generosity. Her table would groan under the weight of multiple courses, featuring exotic meats, fresh fish, seasonal fruits and vegetables, all prepared by a retinue of specialized cooks. Spices, imported at great expense from distant lands, were used liberally, signaling wealth and sophistication. The sheer variety and quantity of food were meant to impress foreign dignitaries and our own subjects, proving the kingdom's bounty and the king's ability to provide. Eating well was a visual testament to power. However, despite the abundance, specific foods and drinks were chosen for their perceived health benefits, especially in relation to fertility and sustaining a pregnancy. Royal physicians would provide detailed recommendations, sometimes based on the humoral theory of medicine, which sought to balance bodily fluids. Certain foods were considered hot or cold, wet or dry, and were prescribed or forbidden accordingly to maintain the queen's health and enhance her reproductive capacity. For example, rich meats might be recommended for strength, while certain herbs could be given to aid digestion or promote sleep. Queen's diet was in essence a continuous medical prescription. Religious mandates also heavily influenced her diet. During periods of Lent, Advent, and other fast days, meat would be strictly forbidden, and the queen, like all Christians, would be expected to abstain. Instead, she would consume fish, vegetables, and other permissible foods. While her fasts would still be grand and varied compared to the common person, they nonetheless adhered to the Church's strictures. These observances reinforced her piety and adherence to religious law, a crucial part of her public image. Queen Eleanor of Provence, known for her devotion, would have strictly observed these fasts, using her table to set an example for her household. Beyond the actual food, the ritual of dining itself was a highly formalized affair. Queen often ate separately from the king in her own chamber or with her ladies. Her meals were attended by numerous servants, tasters, to prevent poisoning, and often musicians or entertainers. The presentation of the food was as important as the food itself, with elaborate carving ceremonies and precise serving protocols. She was a spectator to her own meal, a performance of regal eating. Every bite was observed, every gesture noted, ensuring she maintained the highest standards of decorum. Access to her food was tightly controlled. Every dish would be prepared under strict supervision and transported to her table with utmost care. This was not merely about hygiene. It was a security measure against assassination attempts. The role of the taster was a stark reminder of the constant threat of poisoning, an ever-present anxiety in royal courts. This security also meant the queen had little opportunity for spontaneous snacking or indulging in personal preferences. Everything was accounted for and pre-approved. The queen's diet, was thus a complex tapestry woven from luxury, medicine, religion, and security. It was a symbolic representation of her elevated status, a tool for her health, and a constant reminder of the strictures that governed her life. She was a living embodiment of the court's culinary power and its constant vigilance, with her palate and her health managed as diligently as any state affair. The food on her plate was never just food. It was a statement. Number 11. She was expected to be a saint, but also a strategist. This rule highlights the profound paradox at the heart of a medieval queen's existence. She was expected to embody the highest ideals of Christian piety, purity, and benevolence, acting as a spiritual guide and a model of virtue for her people. Yet, simultaneously, she had to be a shrewd and cunning political strategist, capable of navigating treacherous courtly intrigues, defending her dynastic interests, and wielding power effectively. To reconcile these two seemingly contradictory roles required immense skill, adaptability, and often a degree of carefully managed hypocrisy. As a saintly figure, the queen was expected to be devout, attending Mass daily, sponsoring religious foundations, and engaging in extensive charitable works. She was a patron of monasteries, a protector of the poor, and an exemplar of moral conduct. Her public image was meticulously crafted to portray her as a beacon of Christian grace and righteousness. She might personally tend to the sick, distribute alms, or embark on pious pilgrimages. These acts not only fulfilled her spiritual duties, but also garnered popular support and enhanced the legitimacy of the monarchy, reinforcing the idea that their rule was divinely sanctioned. Queen Margaret of Scotland, as mentioned before, was renowned for her piety, influencing both her court and her kingdom through her devout example and charitable endeavors. However, beneath this veneer of saintliness, the queen had to operate as a ruthless strategist. The medieval world was a brutal place, and royal power was constantly under threat from rival nobles, ambitious relatives, and foreign enemies. To protect her children, her husband, and her own position, she had to be politically astute. This meant understanding the power dynamics of the court, identifying potential threats, forging alliances, and sometimes even engaging in manipulative tactics. She might subtly undermine rivals, promote loyal supporters, or advise the king on military campaigns and diplomatic negotiations. Her strategic mind was as crucial as her spiritual devotion. Consider Eleanor of Aquitaine, one of the most powerful women of the Middle Ages. She was certainly involved in religious patronage and charitable works, fulfilling her saintly duties. Yet she was also a formidable political player, engaging in complex diplomatic negotiations, leading her own armies, and even instigating rebellions against her husband, Henry II. When she felt her interests or those of her sons were threatened, her actions demonstrated a clear strategic mind, often ruthless and ambitious, which ran alongside her outward displays of piety. She epitomized the queen who could wear both hats, positioning from prayer to political maneuver. Challenge lay in balancing these two roles. Without appearing duplicitous, a queen had to be perceived as virtuous and compassionate, but also as strong and capable. Her piety could be a mask for her political ambition, or her strategic decisions could be justified through religious rhetoric. For instance, launching a war might be framed as a defense of Christian lands, even if the underlying motive was territorial expansion. She might use her moral authority to intervene in disputes, acting as a mediator while subtly advancing her own agenda. This duality also meant that a queen's intelligence, while valued, sometimes had to be carefully concealed or presented as innate feminine wisdom rather than calculated cunning. To be too overtly strategic might be seen as unfeminine or even threatening in a patriarchal society. So the queen learned to be a power behind the throne, exerting influence through subtle persuasion, well-placed advice, and the careful cultivation of her network. She was a saint when performing her public duties, and a strategist when navigating the labyrinthine corridors of power, an impressive and often dangerous balancing act that defined her reign. Number 12. Her social calendar was booked solid for life. A medieval queen's life was not one of leisure or quiet contemplation. Instead, her social calendar was a relentless, tightly scheduled procession of duties, ceremonies, and public appearances, booked solid from morning until night for the entirety of her adult life. There was little to no personal time, and certainly no spontaneous engagements. Every moment was structured, every interaction purposeful, serving the constant demands of court, diplomacy, and public image. Her life was a continuous performance on the grand stage of royalty. Her day began early, often with private prayers, followed by a formal dressing, ritual assisted by her ladies in waiting. This was not a quick affair. It was an elaborate process of donning layers of clothing and accessories, preparing her for the day's rigorous schedule. After breakfast, often a public affair, she would immediately dive into her duties. These could include receiving petitions from subjects, overseeing household accounts, meeting with her own advisors, or engaging in charitable work. Every interaction, even seemingly private ones, was a part of her official capacity. The social events were continuous and demanding. She would host foreign ambassadors, attend formal dinners, preside over courtly entertainment, like music and storytelling, and participate in person. These gatherings were not just for enjoyment, they were crucial for fostering alliances, displaying wealth, and reinforcing the social hierarchy. Queen was expected to be charming, engaging, and knowledgeable, making conversation in multiple languages and displaying an intimate understanding of courtly protocol. Imagine having to make polite conversation with potentially hostile foreign dignitaries, or navigate complex social dynamics day in and day out. Religious ceremonies formed a significant part of her schedule. She would attend multiple masses, participate in processions, and observe numerous saints' days and holy festivals. These events were often grand public displays of piety, reinforcing the monarchy's divine right to rule and providing a moral example for the populace. During important feast days, the queen would often be the centerpiece of elaborate banquets and celebrations, requiring her to maintain a dignified and gracious presence for hours on end. Travel was another major component of her perpetually busy calendar. Royal courts were not static. Kings and queens often traveled throughout their kingdoms, visiting various estates, castles, and cities. These royal progresses were arduous journeys, often lasting for weeks or months, involving large retinues of servants and officials. Queen would endure uncomfortable travel conditions, constantly adapting to new environments, all while maintaining her regal demeanor. Each stop on a progress involved new receptions, new ceremonies, and new demands on her time and energy. Even moments of supposed leisure, like embroidery or reading, were often performed in the company of her ladies, making them semi-public affairs. Her personal relationships were also intertwined with her social calendar. Meeting with her children, while sometimes intimate, also served the purpose of instructing them in their royal duties and overseeing their education. The very act of living was a public service. Constant surveillance, the ceaseless demands on her time, and the relentless pressure to always perform meant that a medieval queen rarely experienced true personal freedom or genuine downtime. Calendar was a relentless master, dictating her existence from dawn to dusk year after year. Number 13. She had to manage a massive royal household. A medieval queen was not merely a figurehead. She was the chief executive officer of an enormous, complex, and bustling royal household. This was a monumental administrative undertaking akin to running a small city, and it required exceptional organizational skills, financial acumen, and a firm hand. Her dower lands, often vast and geographically dispersed, provided her with her own income, and managing these estates was a continuous and demanding responsibility. The well-being, efficiency, and reputation of the entire court often hinged on her administrative capabilities. The royal household was a sprawling entity, often comprising hundreds, sometimes thousands of individuals. This included her own ladies-in-waiting, chaplains, physicians, scribes, stablemasters, cooks, scullery maids, guards, and a host of other specialized servants. Queen was responsible for their hiring, supervision, discipline, and even their daily sustenance. She had to ensure that wages were paid, supplies were procured, and that every aspect of the household functioned smoothly. Imagine overseeing a vast organization with no modern communication tools, complex logistics, and a constant flow of personnel. Her financial duties were particularly onerous. Queen managed her own budget derived from her dower lands, which were estates granted to her for her lifetime use. These lands provided her with independent income, which she could use to support her household, engage in charitable works, or contribute to the royal treasury. Managing these estates involved overseeing tenants, collecting rents, administering justice, and making strategic investments. She needed to understand agricultural cycles, market prices, and the complexities of medieval economics. A financially astute queen could significantly bolster the monarchy's resources. Queen Eleanor of Provence, wife of Henry III, was highly involved in managing her dower lands, demonstrating her significant administrative power. Beyond financial and personnel management, the Queen was responsible for the daily logistical operations of the court. This included ensuring adequate food supplies, clean water, heating, and sanitation for the entire household, a significant challenge in medieval times. She oversaw the provisioning of the kitchens, the care of the royal wardrobes, and the maintenance of the castles and palaces that housed the court. When the court went on progress moving from one royal residence to another, the Queen was often responsible for the complex logistics of relocating hundreds of people, their possessions, and all necessary supplies. This involved coordinating transport, pre-arranging accommodation, and ensuring that everything was in place upon arrival. She also played a crucial role in the social and moral fabric of the court. The Queen was expected to maintain decorum, resolve disputes among her ladies and staff, and set a moral example. Her household served as a training ground for young noblewomen who would become her ladies-in-waiting, learning etiquette, skills, and strategic thinking under her tutelage. She was in essence a queen of her own mini-kingdom, within the larger realm responsible for its governance and its reputation. The success of the Queen's management of her household was a direct reflection on her and, by extension, on the king. A well-run, orderly, and prosperous household signaled stability and good governance, while a chaotic or indebted one could be a source of embarrassment and weakness. This immense administrative burden often went unrecognized in historical narratives focusing on battles and political treaties, but it was a fundamental and relentless aspect of a medieval queen's daily life, demanding constant attention, shrewd decision-making. Number 14. Her beauty was a diplomatic tool. While modern discussions of beauty focus on personal aesthetics for a medieval queen, her appearance was fundamentally a diplomatic tool, a strategic asset in the intricate game of international relations. While it was not the sole determinant of her value, her beauty, or at least her presentation of it, could enhance diplomatic ties, secure alliances, and project an image of power and prosperity for her kingdom. It was a silent language, conveying messages about wealth, status, and desirability on the jilling stage. Queen's physical attractiveness, or her ability to project an aura of regal grace and charm, could facilitate smoother negotiations and stronger bonds between kingdoms. When a princess was proposed for a marriage alliance, her physical attributes were often described in great detail by ambassadors and chroniclers. While exaggeration was common, a reputation for beauty could make a prospective marriage more appealing to a foreign monarch, especially if he had many choices. It was a tangible aspect of her dowry, contributing to the overall attractiveness of the alliance. For example, contemporary descriptions of Queen Isabella of France often highlighted her beauty and elegance, which undoubtedly contributed to her initial appeal as a bride for Edward II and later served her well in forming key alliances. Beyond innate beauty, the meticulous grooming and lavish presentation of a queen were essential. Her elaborate hairstyles, often adorned with jewels and veils, her carefully prepared skin, and her refined gestures were all part of creating an impressive and captivating persona. This wasn't about vanity. It was about representing the wealth and sophistication of her court. The richness of her clothing, the shimmer of her jewels, and the overall aura of luxury surrounding her were visual cues that spoke volumes about the resources and power of her husband's kingdom. She was a living embodiment of the nation's prestige, her appearance a constant advertisement. Furthermore, a queen's ability to maintain a dignified and pleasing appearance even under duress demonstrated resilience and control, qualities admired in a ruler. When hosting foreign dignitaries, her elegance and graciousness could put guests at ease, fostering a positive atmosphere for diplomatic discussions. Her charm could smooth over tensions, forge personal connections, and reinforce the bonds between royal houses. She was expected to be a gracious hostess, a skilled conversationalist, and an engaging presence, all while maintaining an unblemished royal bearing. However, the role of beauty as a diplomatic tool also carried immense pressure. There was no room for error. Queen had to always look the part, even if she felt ill or exhausted. Her appearance was subject to constant scrutiny, and any perceived flaw or lack of decorum could be interpreted as a sign of weakness or disrespect. The standards of beauty were also rigid and culturally specific, often valuing a fair complexion, slender build, and specific facial features. While some queens were genuinely celebrated for their looks, for many it was about performing the role of beauty even if they did not personally possess every desired attribute. The concept of beauty as a diplomatic tool also extended to her fertility. Queen's healthy appearance was a strong indicator of her ability to bear children, a critical component of any royal marriage alliance. A robust and vibrant appearance signaled fertility and health, reassuring her husband and the kingdom that the dynastic future was secure. Ultimately, for a medieval queen, her physical presentation was not merely about personal attractiveness. It was a carefully managed strategic asset, a vital component in the complex tapestry of international relations and the projection of dynastic power. Number 15. She had to be a mother to the nation. Beyond her biological role of producing heirs, a medieval queen was expected to embody a profound, symbolic role, that of a mother to the nation. This was a multifaceted duty requiring her to extend her maternal care, wisdom, and benevolence, not just to her own children, but to all the people of the kingdom. She was seen as a fount of compassion, a protector of the vulnerable, and a mediator who could bridge the gap between the distant, often stern figure of the king and the everyday lives of his subjects. This role carried immense social and moral weight. One of the primary ways a queen fulfilled this role was through her extensive charitable works and patronage. She was expected to be a devout Christian and to demonstrate her piety through acts of mercy and generosity. This meant distributing alms to the poor, sponsoring hospices and hospitals, funding convents and monasteries, and even personally visiting the sick or the imprisoned. These acts of benevolence were not just personal virtues. They were public performances that reinforced the monarchy's divine mandate and cemented the Queen's connection with her people. Queen Matilda of Scotland, wife of Henry I of England, was renowned for her charity, establishing hospitals and bridges, demonstrating a tangible maternal concern for the welfare of her subjects. As a mother to the nation, the Queen was often seen as an intercessor, a softer voice, who could appeal to the king on behalf of his subjects. People would often bring petitions to the Queen, seeking her intervention in matters of justice, mercy, or favor. She could act as a mediator in disputes between nobles, or plead for clemency for condemned prisoners. Her perceived compassion and gentle influence were thought to temper the king's more absolute authority, making justice seem more accessible and benevolent. This role made her a crucial conduit between the ruler and the ruled, offering a more approachable face of royal power. Her household often served as a microcosm of the kingdom, a place where young noblewomen came to be educated and serve as her ladies-in-waiting. In this capacity, the queen acted as a surrogate mother, guiding their moral development, teaching them courtly etiquette, and preparing them for their own future roles in society. Her household was a place of learning and cultivation, setting standards for the broader nobility and gentry. The skills and values instilled by the queen in her ladies would then spread throughout the social fabric of the realm. The queen also provided stability and continuity, particularly during times of crisis or when the king was absent. Her steadfast presence, her embodiment of virtuous leadership, and her unwavering dedication to the kingdom provided a sense of security for the people. When the king was away on military campaigns or engaged in foreign diplomacy, the queen often remained in the capital, serving as the constant, visible symbol of royal authority and care. She represented the nurturing aspect of governance, a comforting presence in an often brutal world. Even in her more public duties, such as presiding over feasts or ceremonies, the queen's demeanor was expected to be warm and welcoming, creating an atmosphere of unity and goodwill. She was the hostess of the entire kingdom, welcoming dignitaries and subjects alike, fostering a sense of shared community under the crown. This symbolic motherhood, woven into the very fabric of her existence, made her more than just a royal consort. She was a beloved and often corner of her realm.